Who here has started reading the book?
I read the book.
You read the book. What do you think?
There's no quiz.
The whole book? Not yet. So far, so good? Okay. In general, with the exception of the people who read the whole thing, did everyone at least get through the first chapter?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to take it slow. All right, and who got through the first two? Yeah, okay, that's good. All right, so what I want to do, first of all, are there any questions or comments or reflections about the book so far? Because then I want to go back into the text.
Well done.
Yeah, okay. Yeah?
I was trying to read the second book, but the second book is just a revisiting of the first book.
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you really don't need to read that second.
No, this is a companion. This is a companion.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to use this one a little bit today because I want to illustrate for you something that he does in the book. So for those of you who have been reading the book, and even if you haven't been reading, we're going to look at the book, the story of Noah today. Okay? And in looking at the story of Noah, if you're in the book itself, you can turn to page, was it? 54, thank you. Page 54. I'm in the Who Wrote the Bible book. If you're in the other book, and you probably should open both of them, you can turn to page 42. I do, I have extra books in my office, yeah. But, no, Alvin, at the top, second shelf from the top, there's one of each. Okay, all right. But what I actually want you to do is, if you also have the Chumash, I want you to turn to page 33. I know. Look, I can assure you we're looking at the same text. It's just presented in different ways.
We need 33.
Page 33. The reason I want to show it to you in the Chumash is because the Chumash is what you see when you come to Shul on Shabbat. But I also have something in the Chumash that I don't have in the other books, is that I can move you around to other parts of the Torah. Okay. In general, most people think, when they think about the story of Noah, that the story of Noah actually starts on page 41 in the Red Book. Page 41. Okay?
42. Where it just starts with the
Eleanor? Okay. Most people, when they think about the story of Noah, they think about it starting on page 41 with the phrase, Eile toldot Noach, Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya b'dorotav. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his age. V'Noach yitalech, v'et ha'Elohim yitalech et Noah. And that God walks with Noah. But you can make the argument, actually, that the story of Noah begins at the beginning of chapter 6. And one of the things that Friedman is arguing is that the divisions of this story, remember, when we think about the Torah scroll, if you open up a Torah scroll, how do you know where a chapter starts and ends? You don't. How do you know where a sentence starts and ends? You don't. Right. Every minyan on Thursday, every week on Thursday morning minyan, we always announce it's on page whatever and it's chapter whatever. And I'm sitting there looking in the Torah, I can't find the chapter number. It's ridiculous. Okay. But in general, the pagination, the chapters and the verses and the punctuation, those are all later emendations to the text. They got one long scroll with one long story, and they had to figure out how to parse it. In your book here. Right, this is the Who Wrote the Bible book.
Yeah.
Right, he starts the text in chapter 6, verse 5. And if you're looking at the color-coded version of it, you'll notice that the beginning of chapter 6 is in one color.
Yeah.
The rest of chapter 6 is in another color. And there's a line at verse 9 that says that it's in a third color.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
There's actually one of these up there too if you want. Or here, someone, Emily, you don't want this?
No, I don't need it.
Oh,
I have extra.
And the reason for that is that there are perhaps multiple documents that are being compiled together in order to be able to tell one story. So at the beginning of chapter 6, why might we think to begin the story of Noah at the beginning of chapter 6, verse 1. Take a minute, read quietly chapter 6, verses 1 through verse 8. Why would we start the story of Noah here? When you're reading, notice what name of God is used.
Lord.
There's your word.
The Lord. So what is the Hebrew word for Lord?
This is really big, Luke.
Adonai or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. If we were going to give a title to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Yahwist tradition, we might call that J. And if you notice in your book, the beginning of chapter 6 is all in green. If you look at your key at the top, who's the author? J. That makes sense. Why might we think to start the story of Noah with the beginning verses, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8? Why might we want to do that? Background. Why? Give me the background. What is the background, Lou?
It's, God sees that the humans weren't exactly what he planned on.
Yep.
They're
And?
not doing the greatest, and now he's decided he's going to have to do something about it.
Yep. And in particular, if you look at verse 5 says, Vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz. And the Lord saw how great man's wickedness was on earth. How do we know that there's wickedness in the world? At this time in the story?
Turn on the television.
No. In this time in the
Oh,
story.
sorry.
How do we know there's wickedness?
Falling on the hills of them taking their daughters as wives.
That's true.
But
But
that shouldn't be wicked.
nope, Sodom and Gomorrah is a little later. What is the major story that happens just before this in the Torah? Cain and Abel. What happens with Cain and Abel?
But that was very early on. That was...
Well, hold on. We're not going to compare this yet to the beginning of civilization and evolution and whatever. We're just looking at the Torah.
Okay.
Okay? The stories that immediately precede this are twofold. One is Adam and Chava in the garden. She's told you can eat from anything you want except for the tree of knowledge. What happens when you eat from the tree of knowledge? Not only will you die, but you will know the difference between good and bad. And the first scene that happens after they leave the garden and they have children is Cain kills Abel. And so, now all of a sudden we have that God sees that evil has swelled up in the world. And if you look in verse 7, it says, Vayomer Adonai emche et ha'adam asher barati me'al pnei ha'adama. I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. What is verse 7 suggesting?
It's an inherent characteristic of mankind.
It's a characteristic of mankind. What else?
That God didn't know what he was doing in the first place.
Could be. I love that. That's a great way to think about it. There's a theology right there. Yeah.
God can apparently make mistakes.
God makes mistakes. What else? Yeah.
That God has feelings.
God has feelings.
He
Yeah.
doesn't have any control of it.
God doesn't have control. Phil?
Thematically, when Cain killed Abel, bad killed good, and bad promulgated
Yes. Bad kills good. Bad promulgates. And therefore, what do you do if you want to get rid of bad?
Reset.
Destroy the whole
You
world.
reset.
We're going to hit reset.
We're going to do that soon.
Yes. Now, remember, who is the God that is telling us this story about not liking the way that creation has unfolded?
Adonai.
It's Adonai. Is that Genesis 1 or Genesis 2?
Genesis
Do you remember?
1.
Genesis 2.
2 is the...
Genesis 1 is the God... Right, you only had two choices, 50-50, right? Just to recap, Genesis 1 is Elohim,
Elohim, right.
right? These are the 7 classic days of creation,
Right.
right? Genesis 2, what is the focus of Genesis 2?
Man.
Creation of mankind, or humanity,
Right.
to use the gender appropriate term, okay?
Yeah.
This, yeah,
I would actually argue that 2 is also the creation of good.
It is. Oh yeah. So yeah, I think you're right. Hold on, I'll get there in 1 second. Okay. It's interesting that the God that creates humanity is now the same God that wants to destroy humanity. Why? Because of evil. But who is the God that creates evil? Genesis 2. And there's your link, Phil. Okay? Remember, if we're going to read this story in a way of understanding how the authors are putting it together, forget Genesis 1 for a minute. Imagine for a moment, if you could, that we started the Torah with Genesis 2. This story tells us how humanity is created, and that as a result of the creation of humanity, we're put into the garden and we're given choice. And we can choose to eat anything we want, or we can choose knowledge, which comes with good and bad. In giving us choice, we ultimately decide what we're going to do, and in this case, we choose evil. And so the end, or the beginning of chapter 6 is God, in particular J, or Yahweh, or Adonai, looking at, oh my God, I made a monster. So the only way to get rid of that monster is destroy the world. Except, there's verse 8. Verse 8 says, V'Noah, Noah, matzah chen be'enei Adonai. He found favor in the eyes of Adonai, of the J, of the Yahweh.
What's interesting is they don't say why.
No, we have no
What did he
idea.
do?
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, well,
Maybe he didn't do
No, I mean,
that.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
this point,
what
we
didn't
have-
he do that was bad?
yes.
Okay, but at this point
We have no
context of
End
why-
of story. This is where the first portion of the Torah stops. But I want you to
When does it talk about Noah being an Ish Sadiq?
next beginning of the chapter.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the beginning of the portion. Turn to page
Right, right.
41.
Immediately after that, Noah was
Okay.
a virtuous man.
Look at your color-coded version for a second.
It changes.
It changes
It
color.
changes color. This is how the rainbow is known. All right? It changes color. But if we were reading this continuously, we would have said, Noah found favor in Adonai's eyes. These are the records of Noah. Noah was a virtuous man. Blah, 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 blah. But the Torah actually stops right before we get to Noah.
Right.
And we have the introduction. Some of you who study with me on Friday know that I've highlighted this word before. What is the second word of the beginning of the portion of Noah?
Was.
No, in Hebrew.
No?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Toldot.
Although,
Toldot.
the fan.
Ready for this? Turn back to chapter 2 of the creation story.
Which page?
12.
12
Remember, we said that there was Genesis 1, the Elohist story, which is the story of the 7 days of creation. It concludes with the creation of Shabbat and the cessation of work. And then all of a sudden we have Genesis 2, which is a different understanding of how humanity comes into being and how evil and good come into being. But there's, in verse 4 on page 12, we have verse 4a and verse 4b. 4a is this verse that separates, and it says, Eile toldot hashamayim v'ha'aretz bihi bar'am. The word toldot is like a clue in the Torah that something is shifting. Something is happening. Some period of time is passing.
How does it translate?
Toldot literally means stories or generations. And now what they're suggesting is, I'm going to tell you a different story. And I want you to look for a second at verse, now I'm back on page 41. We're going to jump a little bit. I'm back on page, I'm at chapter 6.
42.
Sorry, 42 in here. 41 in the red Humashim. I'm now in verse 9. Just read the first two sentences, 9 and 10. Who is the God of our story now? It's Elohim. Toldot marks, the word Toldot marks a transition in the way that the story is told. Now, to Barbara's point, Barbara Freeman, she says, we don't know what Noah did that made him so good. But look what we do have in the text. It says, Eile toldot Noach. These are the generations or the line of Noah. He was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. He walked with God. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, a ham sandwich, and Yafet.
And they have already been named before.
They were already named. They were named in the previous
In the
chapter.
previous
They're
chapter.
actually chapter 5. Okay? And then it says in verse 11, the earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. Now, listen carefully to the word. Vatishachet haaretz lifnei ha'Elohim, vatimaleh haaretz chamas.
Ta-da.
Not chametz. That's a Passover story. Okay? Verse 12. Vayar Elohim et haaretz v'hinei nishchata. God sees, very similar to what we had in the creation story, where God would see things and speak things into creation. He sees that the land, v'hinei nishchata, it was corrupt. Ki hishchit kol basar et darko ala haaretz. Why? Because all of the flesh had corrupted its ways on earth. And God says to Noah, Kates kol basar ba lefanai. I'm going to end all of this lawlessness. I'm going to destroy the earth. So make yourself an ark. And if you read the rest of the story from chapter 6 on, you will notice that most of the story is in this dark blue, which is priestly. All right. What do we know about priests? Phil, what do we know about priests? Linda, what do we know about priests? Any other priests in here?
They want to justify things.
Landless.
Landless. They want to justify things.
They want to justify an
They're in
adjustment
this.
to prove a point.
Good. So they often have a particular point that they want to prove.
They're descendants of Aaron.
Good. They're descendants of Aaron. By the way, Aaron's brother was Moses. Moses and Aaron were both from the same tribe, the tribe of Levi, and only Aaron's descendants can be priests.
Yeah.
Okay? What else do we know about priests? Yeah.
They were well educated and they had scribes. So
Good.
They could write this.
They were well educated. They had scribes. They could write things down.
Why
What'd you
only
say?
Aaron's descendants?
Why are only Aaron's descendants?
Because they only
Can only be priests? I mean, that's what the Torah tells us. I mean, we could talk about what the reason is according to the Torah. It seems to be derived from the story of the golden calf. And Moses, while Moses was up on the mountain, Aaron was down here orchestrating Lord of the Flies. They were all kind of dancing around the... You guys remember the book? Okay. They were all dancing around the fire, and they kind of throw all the jewelry in, and out pops a golden calf. Right? And then little piggy was running around over whatever on the side. And Aaron is the person who is presumably in charge while Moses is on the mountain. And you could make the argument that his tshuva, his repentance, is that he now has to take on the burden of leading every person in the Israelite camp through the rituals of the priestly cult. Right? So sacrifices, atonement, etc. Yeah.
We're talking about the priest, but you're also talking about a power.
Yes.
and so
They're powerful. Where do the priests live in general? Where do they hang out?
with the
The
temple.
temple.
At the temple, right? Where's the temple? Jerusalem.
Capitalism.
It's okay. For those of you who were in Torah study this morning at Minyan, we talked about Judah,
Yeah.
right? And the idea that Judah,
Yeah. This is Israelis could be.
okay,
Could be the
the
Israeli.
word Yehudah, Phil, what kind of word is Yehudah?
Jealous.
It's a Yahwist word. Why?
Yeah.
It's a double jealous.
Oh, wow.
Yud Hey Vav Hey. Right? Da actually is a common way of referencing God. If you wanted to write, sometimes you'll see people write this in the corner of their papers,
No one I know.
right? It's a very common thing in the Orthodox world. Bezrat Hashem or B'siyata D'Shmaya, right, which means with support of heaven. The Dalet is often another way of writing God's name. Interestingly, if you were counting in Hebrew, right, you would have Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, Yud Hey, Yud Vav. But because Yud Hey Vav Yud, these are all letters associated with God's name, they change it to be not 10 plus 5 and 10 plus 6, but 9 plus 5 9 plus 6 and 9 plus 7. Okay, so it'd be Tet Vav and Tet Zayin. So there's always these interesting things with these letters. But Yehuda is actually a Yahwist name. I'll give you another name that's Yahwist. Eliyahu, Yeshayahu, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the Yah at the end, Yirmiyahu. Those are all Yahwist names. What?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Right? Anytime that you have those references to the Yuds and the Hays and the Vavs and the Hays, you're getting something. So we were talking about this morning that Yehuda really enters into the story as a perpetuation of the priestly line. But there's one other really important thing that priests do that nobody else does, and I want you to take a look at verse 17. And this is really important. And pretty much every single time that this happens in the Torah, you can guarantee that the priests are behind it. They always have an MO. Verse 17. Someone want to read? I'm on page 43 in the red Chumashim, or I'm on page 43 in this one, so that should make it easy for you.
Oh, 43.
43 and 43. I'm on page 43, verse 17. Someone read, please. Go ahead, Bob.
For my part, I am about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. And of all that lives, of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and store it away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so, just as God commanded him, so he did.
Okay. Priests love breets. What's a breet? A covenant, not a circumcision. Okay? Saying that a bris is a circumcision is actually inaccurate. Sorry for all of you guys who had them. You have to have them done again. All right, a bris means covenant. When you bring a child and give him a boy a bris, or you do a brit bat for a girl, you are welcoming that child into the covenant. Milah is the circumcision. Brit milah is the covenant of circumcision. Brit bat is the covenant of the daughter. Priests love covenants. Why would a priestly author want to include something covenantal in this story with regard to Noah? Yeah.
Increase their power.
It does increase their power. You got it. Why does it increase their power?
Well, they're taking political control.
And
food.
Directing the process.
they're directing the process. Stamp of approval. Yeah, of God, right?
They say that they're the ones who are virtuous.
We're the virtuous ones. We're the ones who are going to survive when everyone else dies.
How do you get that? I'm confused.
Well, remember, we're going to destroy the world here.
Yeah.
But who is not going to get destroyed? Noah. But no, Noah's not a Levi. Noah's not. Noah's a Noah. He's a Noahide.
How is he getting
That's a good question.
So he's not ready. He's not necessarily the.
But remember, if we're thinking about this in terms of authorship, the priests are writing this story in order to teach us something about what they want the message to be that is conveyed to the people.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to look at, probably next week or in 2 weeks, we're going to look at a couple of stories of creation and of flood. We're going to look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the flood narrative, and we're going to look at the story of Timnat and Marduk, which is an ancient Sumerian myth about what happened in creation. And we're going to compare them to what we've read here in the Torah. What you'll notice is every story, every faith, every ancient civilization has a flood narrative. We're not unique in this case, but it would make sense that if someone was writing it, they want you to learn something from it. So the priests are going to say, people who enter into a covenant with God are more virtuous. And, not only that, they tend to do that which is good, as opposed to all the other people who are bad. Phil?
I think it's stronger than that. I think it's saying that bad things happen because people do bad things. Whereas the Epic of Gilgamesh, when we get there, it's not like humans are causally responsible for the flood. And here, you know, Hashem is saying, it's your fault.
Right. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that if you look at the rest of the story, page 43, chapter 7 and chapter 8 of Noah, one of the things that you notice is that there's literally a back and forth of color.
Yeah.
What does that back and forth mean? Who's duking it out?
The priest and the elements.
The J's and the P's. Right? J and P are going at it with one another because they each want to tell their side of the story. If you want an interesting exercise, go home and reread chapters 7 and 8 with just the color and see if it fits together. Right? If you were to remove it and just read all the P and just read all of the J, you would actually get your own story. And what you'll see happening is that they each add a little bit of facts. That's why sometimes you read the Torah and you're like, didn't I just read that? Because you
J
did.
the guys for the Moses
Was that?
and P.
That's what Freeman does.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so you can read it in here, you can read it in here, you can...
And who were the Jays?
Who are the J's? Anyone want to give it a shot? Who are the J's?
They're associated with
They're the followers of Adonai. You could say they're connected to the Judahites, right? So we're talking about, one of the things that Friedman talks about in his book is the political structure that changes over the course of history. So King David comes to power roughly around 1000 before the Common Era. And in 965 BCE, the temple is going to be built. But it's not built by David, it's built by his son Solomon. Why doesn't David build the temple?
God doesn't allow it.
He doesn't allow it because one of the reasons given is that he's a warrior. We're told that kings are not allowed to have three things. They're not allowed to have too much money, they're not allowed to have too big of an army, and they're not allowed to have too many wives.
Does Trump know this?
He's got all of them.
He's not a
Has
king.
one wife, as far as I know.
At a time.
What did you say? He's not a king.
All right?
So you
King
say.
David violates all three of them, and he has blood on his hands because he was a warrior, not to mention the whole little debacle with Bathsheba, but okay, that's an aside, not a big deal. And so Solomon builds the temple. Solomon, in building the temple, amasses tremendous wealth, and when he dies, he passes the kingdom down to two of his sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
He wasn't supposed to amass wealth.
Well, they did it anyway. But he was wise, so it's okay. Jeroboam and Rehoboam split the kingdom in two, into what we'll call the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. What was the name of the northern kingdom? Israel. And what was the southern kingdom? Judah. By the way, it becomes the basis of what we would call today, in the geopolitical world, Judea and Samaria. Okay? Why do you think it was called Judah?
That's the Judah's tribe.
Because that's the tribe that was there. And remember, the Judahites are practitioners of Yahweh. So who are the people who you might think want to make sure that they... Okay, so...
Yeah.
Got it?
So Israel, when they comes, that part is the one which were the other Levites who then migrated down.
Yeah, the Levites tend to spread out a little bit, and one of the things that we will see is a move from a decentralized religion to a centralized religion.
So that's part of the conflict between the
It is.
two, with being Jerusalem being the center or not, or other areas not
Correct.
being.
Remember, Jerusalem wasn't always the capital.
No.
Who moves it?
David.
David moves it.
From Hebron.
No,
That's
Shechem,
right. So
from
David
Shechem.
moves it, the capital. That's also a geopolitical move.
And he defeats the Jebusites who are living in Jerusalem.
Correct, and all of the other sites that are...
Just to point out, Israel is El.
Yes, right.
Elohim,
So if you really want to
Elohim.
play this out, when
And-
Jacob gets a new name, we haven't looked at the Jacob story yet, so it's a little bit of jumping ahead. But Jacob is given a new name,
That's right.
Yeah.
okay? Sar. What is a Sar? Not Tsar, Sar. Sar is a prince. But it also is a play on the word Sarita, which means the one who struggles with or wrestles with El. Yisrael is an E name, not a J name. It's an E name. And anytime you see Yisrael or Elohim, it's an E name, which automatically says something to you about the authorship. We'll get there. Don't worry. We're going to say this a lot of times in order to be able to try to understand it. Linda looks totally lost. You
Reading
okay?
the intro,
Yes.
Freeman talks about Jeroboam as being one of the sons, but he doesn't mention Rehoboam as a son, this other guy.
I'm sure he was his son. I'd have to go back and check. I honestly, when I learned about this for the first time, I kind of got lost with all of the names.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of them. And when you get deeper, one of these days, the Torah study class will actually make it to the Book of Samuel and the Book of Kings. It'll probably be about 50 years, but we'll get there because we've been spending 3.5 years just on Genesis. But they start to go king by king by king, and it's something like, and Jerry became the king. He did good what was in the eyes of the Lord, and he reigned for 40 years. And then Michael became the king, and he didn't do what was so good, and he only reigned for a week. And then Barbara became the queen, and no, there actually weren't that many queens. So. What's that? She stepped on Michael, so right? But literally each person kind of gets a sentence or two, and it depends who did good in the eyes of the Lord. But the entire book splits. And so you literally have, if any of you watch Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or those kinds of books, so if you ever had a difficult time keeping track of all the different kingdoms, it kind of feels a little bit like this.
I had it backwards. He says, when Solomon died, his son, King Rehoboam, lacked of blah, 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 and so Rehoboam ruled only Judah. The rest of Israel chose a man named Jeroboam as king.
I thought they were brothers.
Rehoboam was his son, and he went to the north.
Yeah, that's right.
Apparently Jeroboam wasn't.
They're supposed to be both sides.
Okay. I want to show you a couple of things more about the one last thing in the Noah story before we go. All right. So we just had this story that told us that he's supposed to take all of the animals 2 by 2 onto the ark. Okay. So I want you to turn the page for a second.
Jerome was not his son. It says Jerome. He chose a man named Jerome.
Okay. There you go.
Chose a man named Jerome.
All right. And I want you to look at the beginning of chapter 7 for just a second. Remember, the story that we just read, the end of chapter 6, which said all of the animals go on by twosies.
Yeah.
Okay, that was in, who wrote it? P. Priestley. Okay, now, the beginning of chapter 7 says, Bob, will you read again, please?
Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation. Of every pure animal you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not pure, 2, a male and its mate. Of the birds of the sky also, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. For in 7 days' time I will make it rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the earth all existence that I created. And Noah did just as the Lord commanded him.
Okay, so that's a story that's in J. In the P story, how many animals go onto the ark? 2 by 2, right? 2 of each. In this story that we just read, how many extra animals does he need to bring on?
7 pairs.
6 pairs.
6.
Right? We need to bring on clean animals. Or pure animals.
What does that mean?
Great question. Why might you think that would be a priestly tradition?
Priests do
Sacrifices.
That is correct. Priests do
Is that what a
sacrifices.
pure animal is?
Yes,
Pure animal is to be
that is
sacrificed.
correct. So pure could mean one of 2 things. It could either mean something that's unblemished, or it could be hinting at something that's kosher.
Kosher, so that it can be sacrificed.
You're right, we don't have kosher yet. We don't even get somewhere close to kosher until after the story of Noah. But we'll get there in a little bit. So you raise a great point, Stan. Why is it that the Yahwehs, the J, the Adonais, are calling for pure and impure, but not the priests?
Fine.
So I want you to look at Friedman and look at the note that he gives you. Okay? Look at the very bottom of page 43.
Yeah, because he'll sacrifice.
The number of animals on the ark is 7 pairs of pure and 1 pair of impure in Genesis 7, 2, and 3. Right? That's what we would call J. But it is only 1 pair of each, whether pure or impure, in verses 6, 19 through 20, and 7, 8, 9, whatever it is. That's P. This fits with the fact that in J, Noah will offer sacrifices at the end of the flood. One of the things he does when he first comes off is he offers sacrifices of thanksgiving, which will actually tie into the covenant in some way later.
But
But
if you only have 2 to sacrifice, it's...
that's right. So he needs more than 2 of each animal, or else he sacrifices the species that he brought on to save. Okay.
Duh.
But in P, there are no sacrifices in the story until the establishment of the temple. So the priests can't write about it because it delegitimizes them. We don't have a priestly system. It doesn't exist yet. But the authors want to remind you not of sacrifices, which is what you typically think about with regard to priests, but what do they want to remind you about? Covenant. We do have covenant. And one of the things that we'll actually see when we get to Abraham is that Abraham goes through more than one covenant. He goes through the covenant of the pieces, which is like a big barbecue, and then he goes through the covenant of circumcision. By the way, in general, covenants always have two things. Anyone remember what they are from our other study?
Name change.
They usually involve a name change, and they usually involve an oath. An oath means a sign. Right? So when Abraham circumcises himself, that's the sign. The name change is that he goes from being Avram to Abraham. Right? Even Israel, when he goes through a name change and gets the covenant, he becomes Yisrael instead of Jacob. What's the oath? His thigh gets wrenched. Almost always when there's a covenantal ceremony of sorts. By the way, when Noah comes off the boat, what's the oath?
Rainbow.
The rainbow. What's the name change? Stay tuned. Okay. For those of you who are reading, you're welcome to keep going in the book. You probably will read faster than we get to in the book, but that's okay. But at least we'll start giving you some more context for it. What I would encourage you to do actually is read the story of Noah in here, or in here, and try to tease out where is it J and where is it P, and what do you think the motivation of the author is in writing it the way that they do, or in bringing them together the way that they do. I saw a hand up somewhere over there. Linda.
My question is, who was the editor?
The great R question. Right? We don't call them an editor in biblical criticism. We call them the great redactor. So we will get to the redactor. Yeah.
It occurs to me that for biblical literalists, the solution may be simple if there were only two of each animal.
Right.
Noah sacrificed the dinosaurs and the mammoths.
Right.
That's why they're under the river.
I know, that's right.
And the unicorn.
And the unicorn. Yeah. Well, you know, there's an interesting case. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to look at whether or not the story is reflective. What happens to all of the hundreds of millions of years that happened perhaps before the flood, or during the flood, or between the flood and Noah, and kind of the evolutionary piece of it as well, because there's definitely time. Time is an issue that we're going to have to confront. Like when we read that Methuselah lived to be 900 and whatever, you know, what does that actually mean in the text? So we'll have to understand those things. But it's interesting to think about how dinosaurs and mammoths and whatever else fit into a story like this. Is there space for them, even in the Torah? Does the Torah know about them? Or is the Torah actually a book not about evolution, but about the evolution only of civilization? Right? Is it about the dawn of humanity and not about that which comes before it? That's correct. I mean, we're not going to have dinosaurs writing something like this. Right? So it has to be a certain level of sophistication and intellect to be able to produce a doc. I mean, this is a pretty brilliant document. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a pretty brilliant document in terms of how it was written and put together. Oh.
I haven't seen any footnote or anything why Friedman uses BC instead of BCE.
Oh, probably just an academic term.
Yeah, I would think he would have had a footnote in here.
There are tensions between academics and theologians, so academics tend to go with the academic norm rather than BC. Yeah. Does he say AD?
Yes.
He says AD?
Yeah, I think so. He talks about the Old Testament too, rather than the Bible.
Right. Remember also, the AD, what does AD stand for? Not after death.
Anno Domini.
Anno Domini, which, right? Or the year of our Lord.
I have great problems seeing that.